Good morning, everyone. As Kelly mentioned, my name is Roshni, and I run a marketing consulting practice called Prosh Marketing, where we help startups go to market, figure out marketing strategies, and offer fractional CMO work, which is basically part-time head of marketing work by the hour. Today we're going to chat through the value proposition, and or we're going to chat a bit about value first. We'll dive into a little presentation and then we'll open it up for discussion as usual. And so the value proposition framework that we're going to chat about today is called the Strategyzer framework, which is actually the same framework that Uber used to create their marketing strategy, which is pretty interesting. It's also very practical, and hopefully you'll be able to gain some insights from it as well. So I found this quote that says, "Money flows in the direction of value," which is true, right? Like you really attract the right people through value, but also you need to attract the money. It's great to create a lot of value, but if you're not able to capture that value in the form of monetary rewards, then it might be challenging for your startup. And we'll get into that in a bit. And then marketing is the art of creating genuine customer value. It's the art of helping your customer become better off. And there's always the debate of whether like marketers force things on people or whether people really gravitate towards marketing messages because we're solving a need. And I personally like to think of marketing as education, but in a way that connects with the customer. And so we're educating people about the value of our products, but in a way that makes them excited about it specifically. So we're looking at things from their point of view. And so I found this diagram, which was really interesting to see, like the different elements of value. And there's so many different levels. So like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as some of you might have seen before, you've got like some basic functional needs. And so functional values, things like saving time, making money, reducing risk, things like that. Then we've got like emotional values. So reducing anxiety, nostalgia, badge value, attractiveness. And then when you go higher up, it provides maybe like self-actualization, motivation, affiliation, and belonging. And then finally on the top, it's like that social impact, so self-transcendence. So when you think of different startups who provided these different kinds of values, we've got companies like WeWork at the bottom that just talk about, like that connection, it connects people and it's more functional. Then we've got companies like Peloton, where people kind of have it for badge value, right? Like if you've got a $600 Peloton, you could buy any other bike, but a Peloton has that badge value. And then you've got companies like Headspace that talk about mindfulness and they're going after self-actualization. Then you have companies like Front Funder, which are like a crowdsource equity funding for startups. And they're trying to say like, you're going to help all startups and you're going to move the world. So they're focusing on social impact. And so you can see you can target various elements across and still be successful within the value proposition. And then there are companies like Meta or Facebook that have two different types of value. So it's interesting because we call these in marketing double play for value. So when you're thinking about Facebook, they've got their social network, which is appealing to your social connectivity and things like that. But they also have a B2B play where they're targeting companies with your data. And they're saying you can target people better online through our advertising products with data. So they've come up with a way to have a double play in value with two different pieces of value baked into what they offer. For those of you who are familiar with League, they're another Canadian startup, and they do a really good job of talking about the different value for stakeholders. So when we're creating value propositions, we also want to think about who are the other stakeholders in the buying process. So they're looking at healthcare and insurance. So they've got providers like chiropractors, massage therapists. You've got payers, who are the people who actually pay. These are probably companies who are paying for health insurance. Then you've got consumer health advocates who are thinking about things. And finally, you've got employers, or sorry, payees might be employees who are actually using the program. So you're now thinking about your different stakeholders and what value is created for all of them individually, as well as what you're creating for the entire ecosystem. So thinking through your different personas and the influences of that buying behavior can really help you come up with a more robust messaging strategy, not just a value proposition for your end user. And so going back to the idea of creating value, when we look at, like, for example, the music industry, um, they've created value, but they haven't necessarily back in the day figured out how to actually monetize this value. So for example, you've got musicians on one side and you've got music labels, radio stations, Spotify, event festivals, and these guys are making all the money from the musicians. And the musicians are making the actual content and the value, but they're not making the money, um, apart from like maybe event tickets and things like that. So as a startup, I bring this example up because we don't want to be the musicians creating the value and someone else monetizing off of it. So we need to think about how do we create value uniquely and how do we hold on to that value and market it. So there are a whole bunch of startups that have been challenged with how to scale effectively, and a lot of it comes down to the value proposition. So I always like to start when I work with clients, before we even figure out what channels we go hit, we want to think about what are we saying and how do we maximize our message? And then we figure out where do we distribute that message from. So how do we come up with this base message? So this is the value proposition canvas, and we'll go through a quick video in a second. But to give you a quick orientation, on the left-hand side is all about us, and on the right-hand side is all about our customer. So we think about, first of all, I like to start with the customers. And so we usually do customer research, like interviews, surveys, things like that, and find out, like, what are the things that we can help our customers win with? So what are things that improve their quality of life? And then again, we're thinking about things not just from a functional perspective, but from an emotional perspective and from a transcendence perspective. So looking all the way up that value chain and figuring out all the things that we can do to help. Then we can think of all of the pain points that they have. So what are all of the things that make their life harder? And we list those out. And then on customer jobs, we're listing out all of the things that they need to do. So for example, if this is a cleaning supply product, their job might be to clean, but their job might also be to do it like on a regular basis. So it's, make sure the house is always clean. So maybe if you have a feature later that talks about like dust free for like 5 weeks because it's got an anti-static thing on it, you can solve that customer job, or you can help them with that customer job. So the first step is outlining the things that they could do to make their lives better, things that they could do to improve pain points, and then customer jobs. And then on the other side, now that we've understood the customer, we need to truly understand how do we address these things for the customer. So how do we, with our products and services, help them get the jobs done? So for example, our feature of anti-static helps the customer keep their house cleaner for longer, or our antibacterial thing helps the customer keep away germs. So now we've got all of our products and services. How do we address the customer jobs? Then we think about how do we create those gains for them? So how do we make their lives better? And then on the other side, how do we relieve some of those pains for them as well? So what are the products and services, and how do we relieve the pains? And from there, we have a good idea of how we're solving problems for our customers. So that's the first part of it. And then it comes into a value proposition statement. But let's take a quick look at this video. I'll pop out here. And this one is their official Strategyzer video.
Yeah, everyone's saying we can't hear it. Sometimes you have to share your audio.
Oh, you
Not,
can't hear it?
no, we didn't hear any of it. We just saw it.
Oh, my
Like
apologies.
in the share, sometimes there's also share audio, not just.
Okay, how about I pretty much summarized it, but I'll share the slides with everyone so you can watch the video. The video pretty much says what I did in a more eloquent way, but we can definitely share that with you. And it's linked over here so I can share out the slides. Okay, so going back to an example of what that looks like in real life. So how do we apply something like this? This is an example of LG's value proposition. And so if you look at the customer jobs, really they want to buy better appliances and they want to improve their living experience. Then on the game side, things that would be awesome is if they had an intuitive appliance experience and if they had responsive tools. And some of the pain points they have are a whole bunch of unnecessary buttons and features and outdated appliances. So this is kind of what the customer is experiencing. Now, how do we address this as LG? So LG has a product line, LG Signature. And what they do is they have an easy and manual setup. So that's addressing the intuitive appliance experience. And they also have updated technology, so responsive tools. And some of the pain relievers they offer is, again, that updated technology and simplicity in design. So addressing some of these pain points as well. The way that I personally do this in an exercise is I just do sticky notes, and I usually put the sticky notes on here, and then I like to order them. This is not a Strategyzer method, but the thing is there's so many pains and gains. Which ones are important to our customers? Like there are probably some that are less important and more important. So I love to bring a customer in and I'm like, rank these for me. Rank the pain points in order of actual pain to you. And that way you can start to see from a value perspective, what would be the most convincing or the most important to the customer to address. So now that we've created this value map, what do we do with it? We have, this is an example of ritual, but we create a value proposition. So again, this is an internal value proposition. It's not copywritten in the way that you would write it for customers, but it's internal for you to understand the strategy behind where you're positioning yourself and how you're adding value. So you start off with our products and services. So this would be like our LG Signature line helps what customer segments. So you've thought through, maybe these are like busy professionals who need appliances, or so busy professionals is our customer segment. And what do they want to do? What is their job? So going back to the job here, they want to, maybe the most important thing for them is improve their living experience. So again here, who want to improve their living experience by reducing one of the customer pain points. So maybe by reducing unnecessary buttons and features and increasing a customer gain. So, and increasing access to new technology. So here you're talking about reducing the most important pain point and increasing the most important gain point. And then optionally, you can say, unlike competitors who do this. So like unlike Samsung, who has old technology or something like that. So based again on all of those pieces, you can kind of fill in the blanks here and create your value proposition. Now it might sound clunky. It might not sound great customer language, but again, this is just the foundation. So after you've got your value proposition, then you start to write your consumer facing marketing materials. So then you start to write like one sentences about you know, your different features and the different benefits. So that's the Strategyzer method. I also wanted to share April Dunford's method really quickly. She's written a book called Obviously Awesome. And so if you haven't read it, it's a different take on positioning. So positioning was seen the same way for years and years with that like 2x2 matrix that I'm sure you've seen with like grid marks with like price and quality or speed and price or things like that. And so that was the old school way of doing it. And it's still useful, but she's just come up with a different take, which I thought would be interesting to kind of examine just really quickly. So she starts with the competitive alternatives. And she thinks like, what would customers do if you didn't exist? And this is really great for startups because you're not looking at existing players, because existing players who are real competitors probably don't exist if you're starting something new and innovative, right? So you don't have a direct competitor. So you're looking at what are those substitutes. And then you're looking at what competitive advantages do you have that are unique. So what are key attributes or features that you have that alternatives do not? So now you're thinking like, what makes me different? And then you're thinking, how do we enable value for our customers? So what value do the attributes enable for those customers? So what is unique, and how do those unique pieces offer a life-changing experience for our customers? And then we figure out after what customers care about that a lot. So it's a bit different, right? We're not starting from our customer segment, we're starting from the market and figuring out the market, then our people, then we're going to customers and figuring out who to target, which is interesting if you don't necessarily know who the best target audience is for your product. Because sometimes you build something, this is awesome, but you're not necessarily sure. So this is a different way that we can get there. And then finally, we have to figure out what context makes the value obvious to our target markets. So where can we win? So maybe it's like a geographical market. Maybe it's a psychographical market. Maybe it's like people who are really enthused in a certain sport. And so you want to think about those things. You also want to think about like legal market things. You want to think about societal market things, technology. It's that PEST model: political, economical, social, and tech. So you want to think about like what context does our makes our target segments really appreciate this value. Maybe like, for example, over COVID, when we're virtual, the idea of meeting even remotely is super valuable. So something where, you know, these types of things, what kinds of things in the market could make us more profitable and more valuable. So once you've done that, April has a canvas as well, where you talk about the frame of reference, your competitive alternatives, and then you list out your unique attributes. You give them proof. So you can't just say, you know, we're the best at offering ice skates, like our ice skates are the best, but like why? Our ice skates are the best because we won an award, because they're the sharpest blades, because they last the longest. So like, what is the actual proof point that will make people believe that the attribute is real? And then finally, what customer segments care? And then once you have this, again, you can start creating your messaging. So a couple of different approaches for value propositions, but I thought maybe as a group we could discuss some of these things in no specific order, but it maybe if you could share your value proposition, maybe chat a bit about like, how does your value proposition rate on customer appeal? Is it competitively different or memorable? Any challenges articulating the value of the product? We're happy to workshop as well. Or how are you changing your value proposition for different stakeholders? Like we can talk about, for example, if you've got a B2B versus a B2C segment or different segments, are you changing your messaging? And then finally, have you tested your value proposition? And if you have, how did you test it? So we can chat about all of these things, and happy to just have anyone jump in or with any questions of what we just chatted about.
I do have a question if nobody else wants to go. So mine is a double-sided market, or almost, I guess, a triple-sided marketplace, because I need nonprofits and schools to fundraise for, and then shoppers and buyers, because it's like Poshmark or Depop, but for fundraising. So people can sell items to raise money for good causes. So yeah, I feel like I've created a bunch of different value propositions targeted mostly to the nonprofits, but it's also for buyers and sellers as well. So I just wasn't sure how to tackle all of that in one sentence kind of thing.
Yeah, so really speaking, you need to create a value proposition canvas for each of your segments. So we usually do that. And then as a company, then take a step back. So now that you've created these value propositions for all of your different stakeholders, what are the things that are like consistent amongst all of them? So I'll give you an example. I'm working with GoPeer, which is a peer-to-peer lending network. So you've got investors and borrowers. So we created a value proposition canvas for the investors and one for the borrowers. And then we looked at what was similar. So some things that were similar were helping both achieve financial wellness. One was, you know, from borrowing money, and one was from investing and getting great rates. So that was a common piece. So you want to now go through what are the common pieces And that can help you for your master messaging or your corporate or brand messaging. And then you've got two separate kind of individual messages as you speak to each individual target segment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I can share a bit about my value proposition as well and how it's evolved over time. So when I initially started kind of doing marketing consulting, I thought I would be a marketing consultant. So that was all I knew. There's no fractional CMO at the time, around 7 years ago. So I go out and market, and I'm testing out like my sales pitch, and I'm meeting customers. And a lot of people, consultants, are like, oh, you're going to just give me a PowerPoint and then peace out. We'll never hear from you again, and we won't know how to implement it. So I started hearing some pain points around that. Then I also started hearing some pain points around like, oh, consultants are really expensive, the idea of a consultant. So I started, getting some market feedback, and then eventually I kind of figured out, okay, well, I could be a consultant who sticks around and helps you implement, right? Like I didn't have a name, fractional CMO, for it, but I knew that this was a pain point, and I knew that a lot of consultants were not doing this. So again, it was something that was different, competitively different, and I knew it was solving a pain point unique to our customers. So customer appeal was there. And I didn't have the memorable part yet because it was just consultant who helps you stick around. And then over time, we kind of developed the idea, and in the market, people started coming up with this fractional CMO business, where you were able to explain it in a more succinct way. That you would stick around, you would integrate into the team, you would help coach them on implementation. So the value proposition even grew from the idea of the CMO because you got more aspects of helping them solve their pain points. But and then we figured out that memorable part. But it didn't start like that. And so even like your path to finding your true value proposition might not be a straight path, and you might change along the way as your business changes too. But getting that customer feedback is so valuable because, they're the people experiencing the pain. And as you kind of get closer to them too, it helps identify these things. Customer interviews, even doing like 3 to 5 customer interviews, can so greatly influence the information you have to do this kind of activity. And it doesn't cost a lot of money.
Roshni, I got a question.
Yeah,
How do you,
totally.
maybe not incentivizing, but like where you have external stakeholders, say like board members or, like facilitators or whatever, like what's the best way of trying to get them to kind of, help promote, our organization or anybody else who has a board or anything else? Because like we found in the past, like we write out the simplest scripts and it's like pulling teeth to try to get people to, help us with whatever initiatives we're doing. Like any insight onto like how we can get our external.
Oh, you went on mute.
You're on mute, Ryan.
Did
I heard up to external.
I don't know what I started.
You probably
Okay,
meant
so-
external
okay.
stakeholders to kind of buy
Yeah.
into.
Yeah, promoting.
The first thing I think is showing some of the research, the why. I think people, when they understand like the why or the how and how you got there, I think it makes it stickier and stronger. So usually when we, like the biggest stakeholders here after is usually the sales team, that we have to train on the messaging. And so getting the sales team to remember the messaging, first of all, what we do is we show them the why. So then they start to understand the customers a little bit better and they understand why you're saying it. And then when we share the value proposition, I usually have like a slide of takeaways. What are the 3 things you have to remember about the company, right? And so they don't have to remember all of the different details, but they have to remember 3 main messages there. And then usually in terms of sharing it, it helps if it's top of mind. And so usually when companies do like an exercise like this, they go through creating a communications guide and then they announce it to the company and then it falls dead, right? It's one announcement and that's it. So it's something that you have to celebrate on a regular basis and bring up on a regular basis, point to it. And so people keep on going back to the same content. And so sometimes like at Prosh, our value proposition is at the start of every sell index that we we send to clients. So anytime I'm putting together a proposal, those 3 pillars, I get reminded of my 3 pillars: cost-effective, long-term solution, and sustainable implementation, right? So I consistently remember those things, and everyone on my team consistently remembers it because it's at the start of every pitch deck. It's on our website as well. It's on a lot of different places. And so if they're being reminded by it, that's great. And then the last bit is people share when there's something in it for them, right? And so they're like, if they're a board member, if they're a stakeholder, they're also trying to promote the organization, right? So you want to say, like, we want to sing from the same song sheet. And if all of us say the same things, it's just more powerful. And this is based on all of the research that we've done. So when you talk to a customer about it, they're going to be so much more interested because you're hitting on all of the things that they care about. Yeah, hitting them with multiple emails and also just reminding them in other visual places is definitely helpful. Any other questions, or does anyone want to share their value proposition? A quiet group this morning.
Well, and you know what, maybe Roshni, maybe to reframe it then, some people maybe don't know how to come up with their value proposition. So, and I know you kind of just walked through that. Is there a way that you kind of go, okay, how exactly do I go about doing some of these things? And I think some of the steps that you had there were really interesting. And maybe that's kind of a question.
Yeah, or maybe we can do an example. Like, what if we did it for Tech Connects?
Actually,
And Barry, I can see, he's got a comment.
sure, go ahead. Yeah, I was just going to ask you a question. I'm just curious, what do you find is some of the most pervasive problems with startups in terms of finding their value proposition and kind of their product market fit?
Yeah, I think
which is a huge problem with startups because they don't know what it is, and so they're constantly pivoting until they eventually find it or die. So I'm wondering, what do you see as most prevalent, and how do you walk them through that?
The most painful problem, I would say, is being super generic. And so not knowing your customers deeply enough gives you really generic answers. So like, we're the most innovative. I'm sure you've heard so many startups say you're innovative, right? Or we're the fastest moving, or customer service. Like, those are all super, super generic. And so finding a mix of super generic things to talk about your value proposition doesn't hit that competitively different. And so that's the number one problem that I see with startups, is not understanding your customer deep enough to understand all the nuances that make them special and how you can uniquely solve that. Because yeah, it's all like, oh, we have the best customer service, we're innovative, we've got the first of whatever. But you could say that about almost every other company in a different industry, right? So I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And it stems from a lack of depth on customer research and understanding. And then another challenge I find is, like, customers are not always able to articulate their own pain points and gain points in customer research. And so sometimes, like, it takes ethnographic research, like watching them do things and kind of following them around for a day because they don't know that they have these pain points. And then another challenge is, like, the different stakeholders, because everyone thinks that their area is solving the problem the best. So for example, like, the engineers might think a specific product or feature is something, but you always have to think of, like, the emotional benefits and the social benefits as well, because if you're driving your value proposition entirely on functional benefits, those are things that can be copied eventually. Whereas emotional benefits are things that end up being longer term sticky. So I find that companies that have a good mix of the functional, emotional, and social benefits have the long-term stickiness in their messaging as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, even when you study, like, larger companies as well, a lot of them think about, you know, that emotional side to branding and value propositions as well. And I teach consumer behavior, so we've been going through like the like psychology behind all of this, right? And it's like people's attitudes and, you know, perceptions are all kind of formed in different ways. And so a value proposition has to kind of hit on a lot of these pieces, but all of us have to work together to find what's best for the customer, and what's best for the customer might not be best for product, it might not be best for finance, but it's, you know, so everyone feels that their piece is the most important, but like ultimately, what does the customer think?
Great, thank you.
Roshni, have people changed their value props like over the last 2.5 years based on like, because I don't know if like, I don't think we've changed ours very much, but I think like some of the other stuff, I guess it ebbs and flows. When things got a little bit better, stuff changed. And then when it started stuff going downhill again, people changed. So is it better just to stay consistent and not change, or just kind of go with where the economy is going and just kind of where other people are going? Like, what are your thoughts?
That's a really
like follow
good
the leader or be a leader?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think companies have to have some consistency of what they're offering over time. And so you can maybe change those functional values that you're offering to react to the market conditions. But I think if you change your emotional and social change values as well, then people get confused as to what you are over time. So people will change, the market will change. And so your functional benefits can always address these changes in the marketplace, right? Like you might offer a new feature in your product experience or in your service experience, like Tech Connects now offers, you know, in-person peer-to-peer parties or whatever, right? And so now it's not like a learning, it's a social part. So maybe this is a new thing, and then your value proposition slightly shifts. So, but that's again from a functional perspective. But Tech Connects is always about bringing people together, enabling them to like self-actualize in a higher way by learning, right? So like these key pillars kind of stay the same, and people can expect the same things from you, but your product experience and service experience will change over time. And so like even our value proposition changed over time, but ultimately the same goal was to help startups grow, right? So changing too much will confuse your customers, but you do have to evolve over time with the market. And so an interesting way to do that, if you have like a big change, is usually you announce like a rebrand, right? So if you've got like a giant change in your value proposition, instead of just slowly rolling it out, you make it a marketing campaign and you talk about why. So usually you're like, oh, we're introducing a new logo to celebrate our 250th anniversary or something, right? But people are saying like why they're introducing a new thing, or we're reintroducing it because like we want to put a stand for equity and diversity, right? So we're reintroducing the new Scotiabank logo with all of these different colors because we believe, you know, everyone fits in. So they're shifting the value proposition a little bit, but they're announcing it in a way that they have the opportunity to explain the story, because you're not always going to have the real estate to tell your whole story, right? So if you've just like changed it on a couple places or just your website, it's confusing to the customer.
Maybe, oh, go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, Lori, go for
Laurie,
it.
go ahead. You're on mute.
Oh, so you didn't hear me say, if you wanted to continue, Ryan, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, okay. Well, I just did an exercise over the summer that was interesting because I had put something out, and anyway, I've come up with a new value proposition, but it's a bit wordy, and I like how you've done it more simpler. So that's why I'm kind of shy to to say it. But in the exercise, which was interesting because and then I'm trying to validate right now, like have conversations, validate the end customer, was we did an empathy map, you know, the empathy map exercise, because I went into the rebrand, like for my consulting services, because I hope I'm not taking too long to say this, you know, because I didn't have a clear picture of the customer. But the other thing we did, which was interesting, and I was thinking of it when you said the unlike, was we did something called a aspirational brand exercise. Like, have you heard about that? Well, it was take a completely different industry and delve into a brand that you like. And it completely changed my so that, you know, because it was more, it was a different way. Like I ended up saying Jamie Oliver. Because and it brought out that whole for the greater good. Like Jamie isn't just a cook, he makes a social impact, so he's a social catalyst. And then the person I was working on said, I haven't got comfortable yet in my body to say I'm a business catalyst, you know, like Jamie is a social catalyst, you know. And then that's why I've started to talk about resilience and building, you know, companies that can weather storms of changing markets, you know, because they connect with their customers better and things like that. So it was an interesting, anyway, I just want to know what you thought of that. You know, so my soul that, but I mean, that's almost like, I guess what I find, and then that's what I'm trying to distill it, is you could almost have a soul that for each level of your pyramid. You know, like that's my final so that they build resilient companies that hire people and make the economy better and have a, you know, we have a better world for the greater good, right?
Yeah, and that's your high level messaging. But then again, like on product level messaging, like when you're talking about specific services or specific offerings, you can talk about more specific things there. So your company has an overall value proposition. The interesting part of looking at this is that your products and features also have value specifically. And so you're looking at, like, for example, maybe you offer like ESG consulting on innovation and change, and maybe that solves a specific pain point because there's no one who does that, right? So then even like your products and services have like a level of differentiation and are also built to solve a problem or a customer gain. And so this is also really important as you're building your services and as you're building your product experience to figure out, like, is it something that someone wants, or is it solving a problem in the market, or is it just something that, you know, I think I put together because I think people need, right?
Right, yeah. Well, like, I mean, but it's almost like what you're saying is you need a value proposition for each service. And to me, I've always liked that idea too, because it's a value proposition is almost an agile user story.
Yeah,
too,
and you
so
don't need
you
like a
can keep
whole
drilling down to, yeah, to specific things. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say, like, you don't need the whole value proposition. Like, you don't need this whole thing for each product or service, but you could just have the reducing the pain point, right? The service by reducing whatever pain point or increasing whatever gain point. And you have one small sentence for each of your products and services, so that you're adding value through each of product and service. And then your company has that grander vision, which is to make the world a better place.
Yeah, yeah. And not that, yeah. Not that the grander vision can't be distilled, because that's more how, that's the why, really. Yeah.
Yeah, and then like even like, you know, helping businesses weather the storm, that's very contextually relevant right now, right? But what happens in a couple of years when hopefully the recession stops and we're in good times, like how does that message translate? And do you want to do a rebrand at that point? So you just want to think about like also like a long-term viability of that. Like, what does that look like on the other side of how weather the storm, or like reap the advantages of good times or something, right? Like you have the other part.
Yeah, yeah. Or a company that isn't, I guess what it really is a companies aren't impacted by, I guess that's what I mean by resilience too. Like they're not impacted by what happens externally. They can continue, whether it's good or bad. Yeah. But it is a shift. I guess a lot of people are shifting now from growth to protection, you know, the last 3 years, depending on the company. Yeah.
Yeah. And then their target audience as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if any of you are in B2B, it's interesting to see this change over the different stakeholders. So a lot of times, like, we'll do this for the end user, but we'll also do it for their boss. And their boss might have different kind of things to hit, like they might have to hit financial targets or different things. Then you also want to think of like, if it's a tech product, who's implementing it? Who is that tech team? And what do they want? They want something that's probably easy to onboard, easy to use, has lots of APIs, etc., or whatever, stable isn't going to get hacked. Then you might have the finance team, right, that cares about money, costs, revenue, like is it an ongoing fee, customer support fees included, things like that. So all of these different stakeholders, when we're doing this segment and we're doing the like value proposition canvas, they look totally different, which is really cool, because then you have unique personalities who have unique needs, and you're able to solve hopefully those unique needs differently. And then you can have different collateral or different email nurture sequences or things like that for each stakeholder, that speaks directly to their needs and pain points as well.
Roshni, I look at kind of this value proposition canvas that you have here as a pretty powerful tool to be able just to throw things in. And I know you said it's not like necessarily a pretty way of doing it and beautiful, wording. But I'm just like, as I'm sitting here, I kind of go, okay, our peer groups help business owners who want to, educate and network by reducing loneliness and increasing, networking and education, unlike, and I'm not going to fill in unlike right now because we're being recorded. But like, I kind of look at some of those things, but how do you get the right wording in each of them and be able to think it through properly?
Yeah, what I love to do is I like to get different people in the organization involved in that brainstorming. So when we're creating this value proposition canvas, I usually bring in someone from sales, someone from customer service, maybe an actual customer. Like the best meetings that I have are people who are able to wrangle 1 or 2 customers to come show up for this. And we do it together. Otherwise, like we'll take this and then we go do our customer research, but ideally you'll have people from different parts of the business collaborate. And then everyone, it's a homework, like we go quiet, everyone's got this value proposition up and all our sticky notes up on a whiteboard maybe, and then everyone writes one of these and then we crowdsource. So usually some people have like, oh, I really liked how you described the customer segment. I really liked how you did the jobs to be done. And so crowdsourcing from other people helps kind of find the best language or the right words, because like maybe your customer service just knows the words that people are using because they're on the phone all the time. Or that salesperson knows that that pain point is like really obnoxious because they're getting lots of complaints about it, or they're not able to sell because of that. And so usually they like crowdsourcing the language can be a really nice way to find the best way to say it. If not, if you're a solopreneur, my recommendation is write a couple of different ones. So like try to write maybe 3 to 4 different ones, and then you can kind of like see what do you like the best, which language do you like the best. Because like for me, I always find a challenge writing the jobs to be done or writing the reducing the pain point or increasing the gain point, like, because you're not going to directly take it. Or sometimes I'm like, oh, there are 2 pain points I want to try to jam into 1 sentence, right? And then like, obviously you can't jam in 2, you have to pick 1. So making those strategic choices, if it's your own business, can be tough. But if you have like a salesperson or someone else who's not like the owner of the business or the product person, it can give you a better insight. Product people and marketing people probably have the toughest time doing this exercise. Sales people end up being, and customer service people end up being really good at this exercise, which is interesting to see, but it's good to have everyone in the room. Like I love to see the product people do it too, but product people are very focused on features as opposed to the benefits, which can be challenging for them to think a little differently.
Yeah, I look at this as you kind of say that is sometimes you're stuck kind of right in what you're doing from a day to day that you're not always seeing the other things. And sometimes it's really hard to articulate exactly the why and the how. And you're kind of going, well, yeah, it's just this because. So, and you get it and you're trying to figure out, and maybe somebody else has a totally different reason why they're using something. Going through. Okay,
yeah, and then like you mentioned, finding the right words can be tough, and like everyone wants to massage this so it sounds really nice, even though it's internal. right? Like you want it to like flow and you want to have the right words. And so you spend a lot of time, but like ideally crowdsourcing it can expedite that because you see other people's point of view. You're like, oh, I really like this word or how you explain this job to be done or whatever. And then you can pick the best from each one. And then usually what I like to do is I like to sit on it. So I like to give it at least 3 days to marinate before I go back to it and say, after like just kind of removing myself from that exercise, because when you do this right after the exercise, and then so like removing yourself, does this make sense? Because sometimes you go back and you read the whole value proposition and you put so many things in there that it's just so jam-packed that you're like, it doesn't even make sense. So it's good to kind of step away from it and then come back fresh eyes without going through that whole exercise and just read it through. Is this too much, right? Like, are we trying to put too many pains in one sentence or too many gains? Sometimes you can put them together if they're doing the same thing, but ultimately, like, yeah, is it clear? Do you think it's going to work? And then we test it with customers.
Okay, well, and I think too, that's how you can break it out. What you had said before is that you can have a couple of different value propositions, right? And target different customers or why you have like your specific product.
Yeah, and then also you want to have that high level one, right? So you take all of the things that are consistent and create your big one for your company or brand.
Yeah. How do you test it with customers?
So I go back to the value proposition canvas and test it because if I test it like this has already got my biases in here. So what I want to see here is like, what are your pains? What are the jobs that you need to get done? And what are your gain points? Like, how could you win? And then we can make you win. These things we can figure out ourselves, but it's really filling out that customer profile and making sure they understand it. And then ideally what I want them to do is rank it. So usually it's a sticky note exercise. I get them to put all the sticky notes on a whiteboard, and then we want to rank the pain points and rank the things. It's interesting. I was working with a B2B accounts payable automation company, and they're targeting like CFOs and accounting people and stuff like that. And we thought like it would make their lives easier and faster. So we thought that was the value proposition that we go after. And through our customer research, we actually found out that a key customer job for finance teams is making their stakeholders happy. So they're a customer service team, really. They're an internal service team. So the stakeholders are, looking for them to approve invoices fast. They're looking for them to make it clear for them, all the information. So it's totally different. Like, so that was a huge job to be done. And we found out that our software actually enabled them to look like heroes in the company because they were able to do better reporting and service their clients better. And so the actual value proposition that was more interesting to the customers was our software helps you look good and helps you be your best team player, right? And makes your stakeholders happy because they actually get measured on stakeholder happiness. Usually, like at larger companies, they want to see like how quickly do you answer calls, because like, if you need finance, you need them quickly usually, and how much do you offer service? And so I didn't realize that a finance person was seen as a service person, and I didn't realize they were being evaluated like that. And so through this kind of exercise, we found out that our product didn't help them save time. Our product helped them be superstars in the eyes of their people and get better employee evaluations.